Hello, my name is Matthew Taylor and welcome to our introductory Bush Heritage 101 webinar. I'm joining you today from a different place. I'm up in Armidale in northern New South Wales, which is Anawan and Kamilaroi country. And I'd like to pay my respects to the Anawan and Kamilaroi elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other First Nation peoples who may be online with us today. And also I'd like to recognise that the remarkable Australian environment we strive to conserve is on land that has never been ceded. Well, we have people joining us from all over the country today, and I'm excited to welcome you to what's actually our first 101 webinar. It's a great opportunity for us to share a bit about the Bush Heritage mission, our history, and the important work we do, and also the vision that drives us, and of course our lofty ambitions for the future. Now, you may be new to the organisation, or you may have jumped online for a refresher and to hear from some of our senior leaders in Heather, Beck and Vikki, who are my guests today. Either way, we're delighted to have you with us today in what's going to be an informative and interactive session. Now, on that note, if you'd like to open the chat function at the bottom of your screen, we'd love to see who we have online and where you're joining us from and which country you're on, if you know this. You can also use the chat function to post comments. And if you like to do that at the bottom, that you should find that you can put any questions you may have into the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the conversation. Now, today's session is a little different from the usual Bush Heritage webinars. Instead of deep diving into a subject, we're going to do more of a general introduction to our conservation work. And after an introduction from me, we'll talk to each of our guests, who today are our CEO, Heather Campbell. You can give me a wave, Heather. Our Executive Manager of Science and Conservation, Dr. Rebecca Spindler. That's Beck. And Vikki Parsley, who's our Aboriginal Partnerships Manager for our Southeast region. Welcome, everybody. So before we hear from our esteemed guests, I'll just give you a quick rundown on what Bush Heritage is all about and where we began our mission to return the bush to good health. We're an independent not-for-profit, as you probably know, and we buy and manage land, and we partner with Aboriginal people so we can protect our irreplaceable landscapes and our magnificent native species forever. Our mission is to return the bush to good health. Not insubstantial mission, you'd agree. And we work side by side with traditional owners, and we create partnerships with any sort of landowner who's keen to share our mission. And that can include pastoralists, it can include other organizations who own land. And the idea is to have the most impact we can. We started back in 1991 with our founder, Bob Brown. He saved 2 forest blocks in Tasmania's Liffey Valley, which were doomed for wood chipping. But he got in quick, paid a deposit, and through fundraising, he was able to pay off the subsequent loan that was taken out to purchase those 2 blocks. And thus, Bush Heritage was born. Now, Bob urged expansion because he realised that 2 blocks in Tassie wasn't going to solve the problems being faced by our wildlife and the wonderful plants we have in this country. So he urged expansion and was able to employ more staff, purchase another Tasmanian property, and then moved to mainland Australia. Fast forward, and we've now grown to encompass 42 reserves that we own, and we protect 20 priority landscapes that are home to thousands of native species, 243 of which are actually on the verge of extinction. So a very important job to turn that back round. In the past 30 years, we've built a strong and resilient organisation. It's underpinned and informed by our science programme, and it's nurtured by the collaborative partnerships and a passionate team of conservation professionals, lots of volunteers, and some of you joining today are probably volunteers, and of course, our wonderful supporters who help make it all possible. We sometimes have to make bold decisions, and we've worked hard to secure some significant conservation areas on the basis of national biodiversity priorities and the location of existing reserves and opportunities for strategic partnerships. We generally buy land that features quite a bit of native vegetation because you need that to start the process of then connecting up with other patches and habitat and revegetating to create corridors and connectivity. After we acquire a property, we're always going to be looking to get a conservation covenant put on that, which goes on the land title, which provides ongoing legal protection. We begin a conservation planning process, which looks way into the future and decides what are the critical elements of this landscape and the critical creatures and plants living on it that we need to focus on protecting and looking after. We also set up ecological monitoring, because what you don't measure, you can't report on. You need to know what's going to actually indicate that we're being successful. And we immediately engage with traditional owners to ask them to share their knowledge of the landscape and identify any cultural values on the property, and of course work with them to invite them onto the property, something that perhaps they will have not had the chance to do for hundreds of years. We're proud to be one of only a handful of conservation organisations that use strategic indicators to measure, monitor and report on our conservation impact. And this means we can make some pretty informed decisions about the appropriate management practices. It also means that our supporters can see the real change that our generous donations have made possible. We're also proud to practice landscape scale conservation management, which means we're focused on returning entire landscapes to good health. And this work complements the work of other organisations that protect vulnerable populations behind foul-proof fences for future reintroduction to the wild, the sort of landscapes we're looking after. This approach that acknowledges ecosystems are complex, they're interconnected, and our long-term landscape scale approach ensures that the species we're protecting are a lot more resilient to change. So things like drought, wildfires, and climate change all put pressure on our landscapes and the things that are living in that. And those animals and plants need more space in which to find shelter, food, water, and mates. So in managing these landscapes across our owned reserves and where we work in partnership, we're looking to combat various challenges that threaten the natural environment. This includes climate change, it includes uncontrolled wildfires. Of course, there are always feral animals and feral weeds, but we also have to tackle things like erosion due to land clearing and the loss of certain critical ecosystem engineers from the landscape that need to be reintroduced. Acquiring and caring for bush heritage reserves is made possible by the generosity of our wonderful supporters. We don't receive any ongoing government funding apart from a few project-based grants at the state level, and therefore we rely on donations and philanthropic assistance to fund our work. So our vision of healthy country, protected forever, can only be achieved with the contribution, dedication and collaboration of many people like yourselves. And it's wonderful to see so many wonderful people signing in and letting us know that they're on the webinar today. We're pretty fortunate, aren't we, to live in a country that's home to phenomenal biodiversity, species found nowhere else on Earth. It's why I came to this country from the UK to see this amazing landscape. And we've got remnants of bush from an ancient Gondwana land. Bush heritage protects and restores these landscapes to ensure these precious treasures are not lost to history. So that's a very quick overview of who we are and what we do. I know a lot of you will have been supporters for a long time and will have known and understood this, but it's always helpful to refresh the story and remind ourselves of why it's so important. So now let's talk to our guests and some of the exciting work we're doing and our plans for the future. I'd like to talk to Heather first. Hi, Heather. You've had a long and varied career in the conservation sector. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about yourself first, just by way of introduction, and maybe let us know what it is you enjoy most about working at Bush Heritage, because obviously being the CEO, you've got a lot to do, but what are the highlights?
Oh, and thanks so much, Matthew, and thank you for everybody for joining us. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm sitting on Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to pay my respects to all the elders on the properties that we are operating on and the areas we operate, but particularly what's just over my shoulder, and that's Palunga. So that's Wakamadla country, so up on the edge of the Simpson Desert. And so one of the really special moments I had last year was to be up at Palunga and have a week there with Wakamadla as they were celebrating their native title determination, and to sit on those red sand dunes with Isabel as an elder, with Evelina, who's on our board, and Isabel's her mum, and Evelina's daughter teaching me that I was, crap at working out the tracks in the sand. I was absolutely abysmal, but her teaching me was absolutely fantastic. And that's one of the really special moments, because I'm fundamentally a Kiwi farm kid. I grew up, in the country with bush blocks and disappearing into the bush, looking at, the native birds and the smell of the forest. And what I love about Australia is those big, wide, expansive landscapes and the weird and wacky species that you have over here, which are pretty cool. Everything that can kill you, snakes, spiders, quite like them, as well as then, all the amazing ones. And one of my favorite moments is having one of the team open a nest box in Southwest WA and having that tiny pygmy possum and 2 little babies appear in that nest box and getting that thrill. And for me, that's what drives me, because I want my kids, my 2 teenage Aussie kids, to be able to experience that and to know that those wonders are there and that they're there for all generations. And the fact that we as humans, we're just one species. And for us to all survive and for it to feed our soul, we need all of those species. And of course, I've had lots of other special moments, and I noticed the slide that's come up with me and Bob. One of my other special moments was actually when my daughter, who was, I think, 13 at the time, disappeared down the river at Liffey with Bob looking for platypus, and then them standing in the river next day pulling out weeds. It's those special moments where you get that intergenerational transfer of knowledge and the excitement and the difference that it makes to kids. And now as a year 11, she's wanting to do environmental science. So it's those things that make it really, really special.
That's fantastic, Heather. And I know one of the big things we launched last year was, in fact, in 2021, was our 2030 strategy, taking us out 9 years, which is the longest we've looked forward and planned ahead. And it had some great ambitions, which I know I found personally very inspiring. Can you give us a quick rundown of the main elements of that 2030 strategy?
I'd love to. I think the key thing is that the world is telling us that all of us have to do more and we have to do it now. And that's what really drove our 2030 strategy. And that strategy is focused on deepening and doubling our impact. The key word there, though, is deepening, because we need to do more so that we can protect our species, so that we can manage the feral animals and the weeds, etc. So it's about taking the work that we do at scale, getting greater impact, because the focus has got to be on the impact, not all the activity, but what's the impact, the difference that we're making. So it's really about deepening that. So on our reserves, having more ecologists, more volunteers doing that work, more staff, and then also looking to how we can expand those reserves, particularly where we need to connect up corridors through the landscape so that species can move as it warms up, and so that with the impacts of climate change, species can find those areas of refuge. So yes, we are looking to acquire more reserves, but that's really strategic about where we acquire those so that we can make sure that we've got the resources to really look after them and bring the bush back to good health. So we have these 3 sort of impact areas. Our reserves is one of them. And then one of the key areas that we've worked on for quite a long period of time is working with the traditional owners, with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in partnership with a right way approach, where we take that time to sit down and really get to know each other and work collectively on how we can actually manage the land for all aspects of its health. Now, with the 2030 strategy, we haven't said that we're going to double the partnerships, because that's not our call. It's really up to our partners to determine if that's what they want to do. So this is about that, really recognizing that their ownership, their rights, their enduring relationship with that land and the waters, and taking that time to really deepen those relationships. So that's another key impact area. And then the third one, which is a bit more of an emerging area, is in relationship to agriculture. So we've got this area called natural capital in agriculture, and this is where we place a range of the different things that we do. So some things about how can we utilize the land in our reserves in different ways. So our Carnarvon Reserve is where we have these amazing fields of bluegrass. And so as well as maintaining that biodiversity there, we also harvest that seed and sell that into the market, and that helps fund the reserve operations. We also have things like the Midlands Conservation Fund, which is a partnership with the landholders in Tasmania and the Tasmanian Land Conservancy. And that's been going for 10 years. And one of the key things that we learned out of that partnership was the real value of the connection with the ecologists and the landholders, and that real joy that farmers get from understanding their land more and how they might manage it for both production and for conservation. So we've taken that model that we've been with for 10 years and looked at how do we actually scale that? How do we actually bring that knowledge, those little gems, to other parts of the country? And so we have a range of things where we're working with either really large pastoralists or smaller farms in the sort of the southeast of Australia to really help them understand what are those natural values that they have on their land and how might they work with that to protect those and also get the production outcomes. So it's really exciting, but their aim to be by 2030 to be helping to work across 10 million hectares of that pastoral country. And we're well on the way to that because there's a real hunger within the farming community to understand the biodiversity because farmers fundamentally love their land. So it's really about us working together. And as I mentioned with this one, we can't do it alone and we shouldn't be doing it alone. It's actually about partnerships. So collaboration is the key. And this, great visual of a whole lot of different logos of the organizations we work with is only a small snapshot. So if you're saying, oh, what about X organization or Y, it's highly likely we work with them. Just ran out of room on the slide. So the key thing is if we want to get the biodiversity outcomes of a country as the globe, then we need to do this all together. And so this is, whether it be traditional owner, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander partners or conservation organizations, the corporate world, the government, the region, international organizations. And when you'll hear from Vikki later, when Vikki and I were in the US, that real, hunger and desire for some of the big corporations to actually be part of the solution in Australia to help us protecting our amazing wildlife that we have here, as well as then the connection between First Nations people across the different countries are dealing with the same issues of fire, of feral animals, of weeds. So it really is all about collaboration and how we move forward. So that's what our 2030 strategy is about. It's about collaboration. It's about our amazing supporters. And thank you for all of you that are on the line that make it possible, because over 95% of our funding comes from you and our volunteers. We have roughly, I think it was 197 staff, but over 1,000 volunteers too that make all of the work possible on the ground. So a huge thank you to everybody that makes it possible.
Brilliant. Thanks, Heather. Now, in the introduction, I mentioned that we had reserves in certain landscapes across the country, and that's determined by a very scientific approach to where we look to buy land. And Beck, I know you can probably take us through what a priority landscape is, which is more than the house I'd like to buy because it's got a big garden. It's working on a much bigger scale, isn't it? But before you do that, perhaps you could just introduce yourself to the rest of the gang and your illustrious previous career.
Well, I'm not sure about illustrious, but thank you, Matthew. It's lovely to see you and everybody else. Thank you so much for the invitation. Today I'm coming to you from what was, always will be Ngunnawal land. I am being hosted very generously by Mulligan's Flat near Canberra, the sanctuary there where we're talking about genomics for conservation really across the board. So it's a fabulous gathering and really great to be able to take a few minutes out and have a chat with you all. I have been incredibly lucky in my career and straight out of my PhD, which was on marsupial reproductive biology, I went over to the Smithsonian for 7 years, where I continued to work in the lab really with a view to trying to generate a contraceptive method for feral cats, which still hasn't quite worked out. But I got seduced into the world of endangered species and worked with giant pandas in China and jaguars in Brazil and cheetahs and clouded leopards and black-footed ferrets. I've been extraordinarily lucky. Went to work at Toronto Zoo as head of reproduction in a very single discipline focus, which it turns out isn't for me. and then was lucky enough to take up a job at Taronga, where I was for 10 years head of science and conservation there, which again was just an absolute joy to work with incredible experts, and continued the trend with, of course, what is the best job in the world. So this is a moment of happiness, having reached the bottom of Friendly Beaches down in Tasmania. Bush Heritage is reserved just on the beach just there, and it is absolutely such a joy to be part of Bush Heritage and to work with our experts here. And that's what I and my team do really across the whole of Bush Heritage. We are the support and strategy and structure for so much of what our teams on the ground do. We understand what's important to do. We understand, work with our teams, our experts on the ground, to figure out whether or not it's feasible to do this year, how it all gets planned, what we need help doing. That was Catherine Tuft, in that CEO of Arid Recovery, one of our partners in South Australia in the previous, in this slide. And Kath is one of 46 research partners that we have around the country, working on how to fill in the gaps of conservation knowledge for everyone, not just for Bush Heritage, but for everyone. And then, of course, as our volunteers, and making sure that our volunteers are spending time with us on really critical, absolutely priority work, making sure that their work is valued, that we're able to come back to them and tell them not only about the work that they've done, but the impact that they've had. To Heather's point before, what does it mean that they've taken down a fence, or they've put up a fence, or they've weeded? What does that mean in terms of the health of our conservation targets overall? What we do to do that is basically go forward with the conservation management process, which is all guided by the right way approach. And this approach is not us telling other people what the right way is. This is the approach that we've heard from our partners, our Aboriginal partners, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander partners, around how they want to be engaged by us, how they want to be partnered, how they want to walk hand in hand. We have to respect, we have to listen, and we have to learn and understand what the traditional owners' aspirations are of the reserves where we work, but fundamentally where we are working with Aboriginal people on their land, where we do quite a lot of work collaboratively. They're the boss. You know, we are understanding what their conservation and cultural goals are and what the role is that they want us to play in that. Sometimes their way is the only way. You know, other people will refer to right way approaches as two-way, but really there are more than two ways. And very often it is really only the traditional owner knowledge, the application of that knowledge, and the monitoring and the understanding of how well something's gone using that knowledge is the only thing that's required. Western empirical science often isn't even required across those landscapes. And this is a guiding approach that we use across everything, across our planning, across our generation of research projects. We're not perfect. It's still aspirational for us, but it's something that we're working very, very hard on. That right way approach informs our adaptive management cycle, or the conservation management process, where we plan very clearly. We understand what is important to us, the traditional owners across those landscapes, in order to understand what we need to protect. You can't possibly focus on everything all at once. So we do a materiality concept where we understand what's critically important to protect. What are the threats to those things? What do we do to try and manage those threats? Did we do what we said we were going to do? Did it work out? And what is the ultimate condition of the things that we've identified together, those targets? And number three, the conservation targets and cultural targets. Understand how healthy they are as a result specifically of the work that we've done. And the picture down in the bottom right, there's a really great example where we have restored a particular area of Victoria where we could see across one of our reserves was a significant tree die-off. In that very complex restoration program, every single tree has a QR code. And as we go through and monitor, we look at the QR code, which is an individual identifier for that tree. We understand the height, we understand the breadth of it, we understand what the condition of it, whether it's diseased, whether it's healthy, and how quickly it's growing over time. It's just one example of the kind of monitoring that we undertake in this area. Of course, in all of that, we will often develop areas where we realise we don't have enough knowledge. and we have to develop research programs, and that's where our collaborators come in to understanding and helping us derive more knowledge. So again, we know that we're undertaking the best actions that we possibly can and that we're providing the best impact that we can. We're never doing it alone. One of my favourite sayings is nobody can do everything and nobody can do anything alone, and that is particularly true of Bush Heritage. We're highly collaborative and very grateful for all of the partners that we work with across the country. One of the things that we've had to do, just moving on, is make sure that we're well and truly keeping up and maintaining foresight so that we're not just managing for what is there now, but what we know is going to happen in the future. Now, knowing in that case is a serious question. There's quite a bit of uncertainty around this, but we can plan scenarios and we can present that scenarios to our local teams on the ground, including the traditional owners, and understand what if this scenario happened? What if this landscape was to dry? What if this landscape was to experience significant flooding? How do we prepare for that? How do we prevent the worst of those impacts? Not just wait for it to happen and respond, but actually get ahead of it and really understand, identify the areas that are critical to protect in place, particularly those refugia that even if biodiversity does change in terms of composition a little bit in the future, those refugia are going to protect whatever is there for generations to come, making sure that we're protecting and building landscape connectivity. If you think about the ecosystem as a fabric, you know, a really strong piece of linen will catch and will be able to withstand change and pressure much, much better than a lattice work, a lace work, you know, that has holes all the way through it. We're trying to build back our ecosystems into really strong linen and fill in some of those holes that you might get in lace work. We're using the foresight that's been given to us by organisations like CSIRO, and enormous gratitude to them for huge amounts of free data that they've just given Bush Heritage out of the generosity of their heart, so that we can plan for the future and act now to protect what we know is going to be there, and start looking at real-time data so that we see those very early changes as a result of climate change or as any other change in the environment that we know we're going to be experiencing that rapid change coming through. And we're working with others to make sure that we are ahead of the game, building innovative solutions. Not all will work. We need to test them now and have them ready to be put in our toolbox so that when we really, really need them, we can just pull them out and activate them. One of the first steps that we've had to do in this preparation, I guess, for climate change is have a look at our priority landscapes. Our priority landscapes were developed by my predecessor, Jim Radford, and again, collaborating academics who looked at areas across Australia that were underprotected in the National Reserve System. One of the goals of the National Reserve System, all of the protected areas across Australia, is to make sure that we have every single type of ecosystem protected so that we have that good representation across the country. And then the assumption, of course, is that within that, the constituent species of those ecosystems will also be protected. So we go specifically to try and find those underprotected or underrepresented ecosystem types across Australia, ecosystems that are at threat and ecosystems where they're at threat where we can do something about it. So we've identified large areas across Australia where we think we can really make a significant difference by working with traditional owners and by managing the threats across those landscapes. A couple of years ago in 2020, we undertook a bit of an analysis of those priority landscapes to understand how they were going to fare with climate change and understand really what our response should be and our preparation should be. And we've separated them into three large categories: those resilient landscapes that are largely going to be able to withstand the changes that we can foresee coming with climate change, or that's manageable. It might take investment, but those changes are going to be manageable. They're also characterised by relatively intact and fairly good condition landscapes. The next one are reconnection landscapes, where they're highly sought after. They're well and truly at threat of being converted into non-conservation, non-biodiverse, lovely, intact, functioning landscapes into productive landscapes. And in fact, in some cases has been. So where we could really have a great impact across there is rebuilding that connectivity, restoring areas that will build back those spaces, those gaps in the linen, and make sure that we're managing the threats as much as we can so they are as healthy as they possibly can. And of course, reconnecting people to those landscapes as well. And then finally, we have a few strengthened landscapes where we really won't be looking to expand too much into new large areas in these landscapes, but we will be focusing very much on innovation across these areas, making sure that we're very clear on the areas and the assets, the natural assets that need to be protected in place, and working with traditional owners, academics, farmers, engineers, everyone to try and develop new and interesting ideas of ways that we can protect those things in place. So this is a map of our priority landscapes, and the resilient landscapes are here in orange, reconnect are in green, and the strengthened landscapes are in blue. So we have an awful lot of work to do. It's just that depending on the area that you're in, that work is focused a little bit differently now, making sure that we are well and truly prepared for the changes that are coming.
Fantastic. Thanks, Beck. So I'd like to switch now to Vikki. And Vikki, I've had the pleasure of going bush with you, which has been wonderful. And when you come off mute, can you perhaps tell us a little bit about your connection as a First Nations person to the environment and conservation, and what your role actually entails?
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, so first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm calling in today from my grandmother's country, Yuin Walbunja lands on the New South Wales South Coast. I grew up down in this neck of the woods. I came from a large Aboriginal family. My mother was one of 10 children, so it was impressed upon me at a very young age about being out on country and the importance of the landscape. Being out on country with multiple aunties and uncles and the cousins as well. So that led me down a path and a career with conservation and heritage work. So I've always worked in this sector, about 25 years now, and I've been with Bush Heritage for nearly 18 months now, working as the Aboriginal Partnerships Manager. So part of my role has been working closely with traditional owners, identifying traditional owners, and being that conduit to connect them into some of the Bush Heritage reserves that we now manage. And I work quite closely with other people across the organisation, like Rebecca in the science field. Heather touched on before, we had a trip, there's a slide there now on the screen with the trip that we did last year. We went over to the US and we had the pleasure of being welcomed onto Yurok tribal lands and going and meeting some of the Yurok women. So Liz here in this slide with Heather and myself was quite an inspiration, and it was really a nice opportunity for us to discuss a lot of common ground that we face as First Nations people on a global scale as well. So often the conversations and the things that we are faced with, certain challenges within our communities, is quite similar.
Yes, fantastic. So perhaps you can tell us a bit about our Aboriginal partnerships and in particular how culture is recognised on our reserves, and of course the importance of Indigenous knowledge in conservation and in particular, combating climate change.
Thanks again, Matthew. So as I was saying before, part of my role since I've started has been identifying traditional owner groups and family members, starting conversations with them and inviting them onto our Bush Heritage reserves. But Aboriginal partnerships, we work both on reserve and also off reserve. So I often am invited to come out into community and attend meetings or participate in conversations where it's relevant to caring for country. With Bush Heritage as well, we try to engage with TOs at the earliest possible time frame, get them involved in some of our conservation management processes. We also talk about developing healthy country plans, so based on traditional owner aspirations, the cultural values, and the cultural values are the important things that traditional owners see in the landscape that they would like to have managed. So in some cases, some of those things are tangible aspects, and then there's the intangible as well. We've got this map up now of the reserves that we have around Australia. So we are nationwide. We have a number of different relationships with traditional owners that are connected into those landscapes. And a lot of conversation focuses around, well, what are the important values of the communities and the people that they see, and how can we implement or feed that into our conservation management planning processes. It gives Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities the opportunity to participate and take on a bit more of a culturally led conservation lead in this space, working in collaboration with us. So it's really important, the work that we're currently doing, and Bush Heritage has been doing this for the last 17 years. The map that you can see now actually shows you some of the longest, I suppose, standing relationships that have occurred in relation to Rebecca talking earlier about and touching on priority landscapes and looking at those areas that you know, maybe priorities and as I mentioned before, that have significant cultural aspects that traditional owners want to engage and participate and see preserved as part of, you know, for future generations as well. So often the values that are aligned at Bush Heritage are not so different from what traditional owners want on the ground. It's quite interesting at this point in time as well, because with climate change has become this kind of renewed interest and more understanding that Indigenous knowledge systems. We are currently leading the response in Australia through the deep knowledge of land, water, and also some of our practices of, you know, using cultural burning regimes. So that's something certainly that people are much more interested in today in light of climate change and managing carbon as well in the environment. But for Aboriginal people, caring for country using fire as a tool has become something that's, you know, very, very important. And of course, climate change impacts our communities as well. And through this process, it just gives us an opportunity to work a bit more closer together and develop extensive management plans so that, you know, again, with the aligned values of Bush Heritage, we can work together to protect native species, manage invasive weeds, feral animals. And by doing this, we're also providing opportunities to develop, you know, economic viability for communities as well through these processes. So there's that give from both sides. Cultural burning is also one of the biggest things that we're dealing with at the moment in the Aboriginal partnership conversations. And it's looking at, you know, how can we utilise our slow cool burns? And for people who may not be familiar, cultural burns are not like the type of wildfires that people see or have experienced in the past. And they're maintained in a way where, you know, community dictate the time when it's ready to burn by assessing country. There's other indicators depending on, you know, factors like soil moisture. There's communities that I work with that, you know, elders walk in and can visually scan over the ground and say, yes, it's time to burn. Let's burn now. These cool burns are much more viable. They actually, we're starting to get information that they do increase biodiversity. They also allow for wildlife, animals, birds, insects to actually remove themselves from fire as opposed to, you know, having to deal with what we now are seeing with current climate change, these catastrophic, devastating wildfires that are sweeping through landscape and having the opposite effect. Conversations also mean at this time that people are willing to share knowledge so that we can improve on not just the biodiversity outcomes and maintaining country for future generations, but it's also about, you know, asset management. That's also something that is quite important to a lot of people in this day and age. So the cultural burns have been a forward conversation at this point and are growing in momentum. We're starting to see more organisations coming through with that. So touching back to Rebecca's point before on right way approach, with our partnerships, it actually, you know, it enables us to empower communities. We're helping through capacity building with the development of new skills. Again, it's maintaining and providing an intimate connection for people to return to country where since colonisation, in some cases, people have been removed from landscape for so long. We're actually ensuring the opportunities now for people to return. And it's also, of course, that transition of knowledge to the younger generations to participate in the programs that we're doing. So Aboriginal partnerships has been a growing area with bush heritage. We also do cultural heritage assessments, invite the traditional owners to come in and be active and lead those conversations. So if they would like to come in and you know, talk to us about identifying plants that are of significance, or there may be, you know, stories that they want to share, but at no time does bush heritage ever enforce that, you know, we will maintain or take that knowledge from people. We're always led by the traditional owners that we work with, and we value and respect that information. And Rebecca and Heather, I believe, both touched on that before with, you know, the importance of that collaboration. And again, that we're putting all this information together, working alongside scientists, and all working towards similar goals and aspirations.
Fantastic, Vikki. And it's always very inspiring. I know when I've been out on reserve and get the privilege of meeting any of the elders or the family groups, it's just so wonderful to hear the conversation and see the world through a different set of eyes. And, you know, being a keen bird watcher, I always think I'm alert to what's going on. And then you realize just what a tiny slice of the world you see when you're looking for birds or enjoying a walk, compared to someone who's walked the land and whose family have for, you know, upwards of 60,000 years. So thanks for sharing some of that story. Just a reminder to everybody, if you've got any questions on anything that Heather, Vikki or Beck have been talking about, please pop them in the chat, because we're going to head into a Q&A session right now. One of the ones that was sent through just before the webinar began was from Andrew Sue, who works at Saving Our Species. And this is a fairly big question. So whoever would like to jump in and try and answer this one, please do. His question is, considering the current landscape that is being bombarded with so many things, climate change impacts, threatened species, extinctions, a general decline in biodiversity. We've also got global instability. This reads like the tabloid press, doesn't it? But it's true. It's the sort of stuff we all have to deal with. We've got turbulent economies. We've got increased costs of living. Given all that, what are the biggest challenges being faced by bush heritage at this time? And what's our strategy to tackle these? Now, I don't think he's asking us to solve the economy and the increased cost of living, but is acknowledging the fact that all of this contributes to how an organisation like Bush Heritage needs to cut its cloth and work out how we actually tackle our work and do it most effectively. Hands up, whoever would like to have a go at that one.
I'll start and then
Thanks,
pass
Heather.
it to Beck or Vikki from more of a science perspective, because there's, you know, some big challenges globally that, you know, we're heading into. And I think as I look at it from a CEO's perspective as an organisation, I go, yep, there's challenges, but, you know, we came through the GFC, we came through all of those times, and we're still fundamentally doing the work on the land. So the big thing that, you know, sort of keeps me awake at night is, how do I make sure we tell the stories to keep people really engaged, to keep supporting us to do this work as the world goes slightly crazy. But I'm really confident, because we have that amazing 30,000 plus supporters, you know, and the volunteers who are saying, actually, we need to have this impact for the long term. We need to bring the bush back to good health. That I'm really confident that people will provide us with the resources to do that. And then I'm about to drift into Beck's area, but one of the things that, you know, also gives me hope. And I was actually standing at home at one stage panicking because I was losing all my big red stringy bucks, because I live on the edge of the Yarra Valley. And I rang up one of our ecologists in a mass panic going, help, Kate, you know, I'm losing all of these. And she said, don't freak out, Heather. You've actually still got a functioning ecosystem. Look at all the other trees that are coming up in its place and look at what's happening. So that gives me that sense of hope. And then I look at just some of our work, like the Southwest WA, where we did the re-veg work 10 years ago. And we've got malleefowl and pygmy possums and hunting possums and all that coming back through the landscape. We know we haven't got all the cats out or all the foxes, but we've tipped the balance. And so I get that constant sense of hope. Yes, the challenges are big, but we put our collective brains together. We can really actually help, you know, step into those challenges and really have some amazing outcomes. But Beck or Vikki may want to add to that.
I can have a go first, Vic, if you want, or do you want to go first? I think that's spot on, Heather. I think we need to be aware of all of those things and put that into context and in planning language. That's our situation analysis. So we do a situation analysis and we take a really hard look at not only what are the things that are important, but what are all the threats to those things? What are the things that are going to make our job hard? And then we take a break and we enjoy each other and we go for a really long walk in beautiful, lovely, functioning, healthy country, because that always makes you feel better. And then we come back and we chunk it down into the things that we've got to do, the things that we've got to manage land until land works. And taking that really proactive, action-oriented, solution-oriented approach means that you are focused in a relatively small area and you are smashing it out. And nobody is better than Bush Heritage guys on the ground. Honestly, our staff are just absolutely incredible at taking a really hard issue and working it until it's done. And if you ever need a sense of hope, just plug into our social media, plug into our website, see the photos, see the impact of the work that people on the ground are doing. Our staff, traditional owners, collaborators, students, our interns are all just having wins every single day. And in order for us to have the organisational impact that we have and we want to continue to have, it takes those daily wins, and though every single one of those needs to be celebrated. And I'm just ever grateful for our staff and our partners putting up photos that we can put up on the website and on socials to be able to say, yep, today was a win, look what we managed to do, and that everyone should be able to celebrate that.
Thanks for that. We have had another question come through from Tina. And she's asking and saying that having just graduated from uni with a great passion for conservation and behaviour and ecology and research, she's basically clearly an environmentalist and wants a career. What would be our advice about getting involved with Bush Heritage so she can make a positive impact and help the biodiverse, wonderful landscapes we've got? Perhaps Beck, that's one that you could talk to a little bit about our various channels for getting involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said fresh grad, is that right? Newly graduated. So think about postgrad. Always think about learning more and taking opportunities to volunteer. And that's, and I recognise 100%, that is not as easy as it sounds. We are very picky about our volunteers, and I always, I tell people one of my plans before I got this job was to volunteer with Bush Heritage, and as a fairly esoteric scientist at the time, I didn't have a lot of practical skills that Bush Heritage wanted, but then I got the job. So I was skilled enough to be paid by the organisation, but not skilled enough to not be paid by the organisation, which is doesn't hold out a lot of hope, I know, for volunteering. We do have an internship program, so if you were to do a PhD, you can take 6 months and work with us as an intern and get an industry placement. There are other opportunities to volunteer as well. So volunteer with anyone who's doing really fantastic things practically on the ground. I cannot overemphasize the value of having hands-on practical experience. That will set you apart from other graduates, undergraduates. And be thinking, be talking, ask for a mentor, someone who is working in conservation. Just ask to meet up with someone once a month to have a big chat about what are the big issues? What are the big questions? What's on your mind? How do you develop the critical thinking and the ability to develop questions of your own that then you can go and investigate or go and just work on if you want to be a practitioner rather than a scientist? So I think engaging with people at a large level and individually is my advice.
Thanks, Beck. And I'd just stress that our volunteer program at Bush Heritage, I think, is one of the biggest in the conservation space, and it's certainly the best run based on the feedback we get from our volunteers. And I myself am halfway to Queensland, about to volunteer for 2 weeks doing bird surveys, because you know, the best thing I can think of other than working for Bush Heritage is to actually volunteer in any spare time I've got. So like you, I'd advocate getting involved and in any possible way.
Matthew, I might just add too, and this might be a good time for Vikki to chime in, but also really get to know what the traditional owners of the area that you're living in, are doing, and you get involved with them if you can, and with other local conservation organisations, whether that be your land cares, your bush cares, your friends of those sorts of things, and really enjoy the area that you're living in, because even if you're in the middle of the city, you'll discover there's a whole lot of biodiversity gems, and there's a whole lot of cultural things to learn and explore. But Vikki, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Oh, there's some great points there. That was perfect, Heather. And I suppose just to add additional information to that, as you stated, reaching out and getting to know the local groups, which is one of our common practices for, acknowledging what country that we're standing on and where we live and where we work and reside, and, taking the opportunity to educate yourself and your families, and participate in. There's a lot of cultural tourism that's at the forefront at the moment, and that covers a lot of the conservation space as well. So there's definitely some opportunities there. And again, I can't reiterate how important that volunteering is in communities and other organisations. That's a great segue into developing those relationships, and just getting to a further understanding of the landscapes that you live in.
And Matthew, I should mention, I know Megan's doing a great job of putting up in the chat, the links to like our volunteering portal. And I know that there was a newsletter at the beginning of this year that went out to our volunteers with all of the opportunities during the year. And there's a raft of them. And we have these amazing volunteer coordinators that are sort of like a volunteer dating service, which match the skills to the jobs, etc. So check that out.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Another question that's come through is asking about what we're doing to increase awareness of bush heritage and the issues we've been talking about to our young people, the next generation, especially in schools. And I know before I chuck that across to the panel, I was down at our Scottsdale Reserve last week, and I was delighted to find that whilst I was showing a few of our major donors around who are helping support us, there were also 2 school groups getting the opportunity to just be out in country and get the experience of being able to climb a tree, being able to sit round a fire and toast a piece of bread on the end of a stick, things that I'd almost forgotten we did when we were kids, and be taken out on country and shown what we do to collect seeds from the wildflowers and then walk them across to an area that needed more of them and scatter them to the wind. And it was such a joy to see this amount of effort being put into the next generation, and that's been formed through connections between our reserve staff and the local schools in the region. So that was just a little sort of insight, and a very moving one to see just how, and I know how powerful that experience can be. My dad got me into the bush by taking me across the moors, probably unwillingly, until he showed me a rock and said, "Can you climb that?" And I went, "I reckon." And thus was born my love affair with the bush, rock climbing and bird watching. So that question about kids, anybody else like to just add, how we can engage the next generation in a meaningful way? Or have I said it all?
Yeah, we all want to jump in. Look, and I'll just, I suppose, share a couple of things. Obviously, because particularly if you've got kids that are in the teenage years, they're glued to social media. So really it's sharing those stories in a way that engage people and also engage multiple generations. And that's a key thing. And having some of the young voices share their stories of when they're out on the reserves in the different ways. And there's also a program that we have for little kids, particularly around the holidays, where you can go onto our website and download some material, particularly for parents or grandparents who are wanting to introduce their kids to the bush and different species, etc. But I think the key thing is, getting kids out there, just getting kids out into the bush and really enjoying it. I know my local school in the 3 and 4 year old kinder, once a week, they go out and have the whole classroom sort of day out in the bush, and they get muddy and filthy and they have an absolute ball. And that makes that connection. But sorry, Beck and Vikki, you might have some other ideas of things that you do with kids.
Just another one quickly. I know that a lot of the schools at the moment have syllabus and curriculum built in that covers a lot of these subjects. So, even for families, it pays to be a bit proactive and encourage the schools to get out and start utilising some of those spaces, as Heather's touched on. And, most certainly some of our reserves at Bush Heritage are very family friendly around different parts of the country. So even just looking into our website have a look at opportunities to get out on country.
Yeah. And one last thing that Megan's reminded me is that we've got an upcoming event in May called Science Superstars, Careers in Environmental Science and Conservation, which is an online event with about 140 schools registered. So we've got about 4,000 students who are going to be hearing about the sort of decision about where to go next after school and help in doing that. So a very important part of making sure that healthy landscapes protected forever is actually being set as a sort of mission in the next generation. So I think we've got time for one more question. This is perhaps just a personal one for you. What are you most looking forward to in the 12 months ahead? What's the exciting things on the horizon?
You're only giving me one. So it's, for me, it's heaps. For me, it's because we're now living with COVID, we're through all the lockdowns for those of us that live near Melbourne, is actually getting out there. And I was so privileged last week to do a bit of a road trip around our staff in the western part of Victoria. And then on Monday to see Vikki and all of her colleagues that live on the south coast of New South Wales, actually getting out there in the country with the teams, being out there, being able to be just surrounded by the bush and having all of those experiences and just learning, learning by being out there together. So I just want to get out there. So if it could stop raining in Queensland, so if any of you have connections to whoever's operating the rain gods upstairs, if we could stop raining in Queensland, I'd love to get out to all of those reserves.
We're working on it, Heather. I have a very similar one. So we've just been through a bit of a regeneration of a lot of our systems that help us take up data in the field and organise it through the systems and integrate with a whole lot of information that we get from satellite images and drones and things. I'm going to take my team out on country. So we'll all be working and talking together with traditional owners, with reserve managers, with HLMs in the area to try and talk together and make sure that we're all refining the systems together. But I'm going to squeeze in another half. Bush Heritage has just been invited to present at the International Conservation Biology Conference, which is going to be in Rwanda later this year. So I know.
I'm not surprised that Beck Spindler's off to Rwanda. How wonderful.
Actually, I'm probably going to send my colleague, Oliver Costello, to talk about our integrated knowledge system and a few other things that we've been doing that really changes the way protected areas are thought of and categorised, really. It's just insanity to me that around the world, we identify areas that are really lovely and pristine, functioning in a way that means we want to protect them forever. Then we take the people that have been doing that work and protecting it, and we make them move over there while we hire other people that aren't connected to that country to protect that country, have to give them, those jobs, and we have to find jobs and homes for the other people. Anyway, we're rewriting the way we analyse and protect areas around the world, which is going to be a bit exciting.
What a privilege. Fantastic. What about you, Vikki? The year ahead?
The year ahead, I think I'm more excited at the moment that we've had a substantial growth in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workforce, and we're going to be deepening our impact and the work that we do with communities across the country. So that's pretty exciting times, as I said, in light of recent conversations on how we can assist through conservation management practices and in the wake of climate change. So
fantastic. Well, likewise, I'm very excited, and just want to let everybody know that there's a few other events coming up. Our next online event, in fact, is in just a couple of weeks. It's live from Edgbaston Reserve in Queensland, which is where I'll be travelling on Saturday. So that's Wednesday the 29th, and we've got a great programme there discussing some of the amazing beasts that live in these freshwater springs and nowhere else on Earth. So please join us for that on Wednesday the 29th. You can register for that online on the website. We're also about to start the second season of our podcast called Big Sky Country next month. So you look out for that wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, there'll be invitations about these and other events coming into your inbox. And do check out Instagram. If you're not an Instagram junkie yet, I've recently become one. It's not just because of Bush Heritage, but the stories on there and the pictures are wonderful little stories, and definitely keep the inspiration going when it's a grey day and dismal and we're worried about all those negative things that are happening. So as Beck said, I exhort you to get out into the bush, and see how amazing our country is, and join us for some of these additional events that are coming up. And please let us know if you found this webinar to be helpful. As I said, it's a bit of a new thing. We want to look at the basics and really explain who and what we are. And that's complemented by the regular series of Bush broadcasts, which do more of a deep dive. As I say, next one, Wednesday 29th. And now, if you've got 5 minutes available, please stay tuned. It's become a bit of a feature of our webinars, having some beautiful shots of the animals and the landscapes that Bush Heritage looks after, a nice bit of slow conservation to wind down the day before you think about moving to the first glass of something interesting. So thank you, Heather, thank you, Beck, thank you, Vikki, for joining us today, and thank you to all the wonderful people who've joined us online, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you.